see the, work with the doctors and all that. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I do that in the morning, and in the afternoon, if the babies, because we're a level 4, so a lot of babies come from Cleveland Clinic or those other hospitals,
Yeah.
and so a lot of them are micro preemies, and if they're that, then they have to have their eyes checked to make sure that their eyes are developing properly after they were born so early.
Yeah.
So it's called ROP, and so I manage that. That's once a week, so I make sure all the babies are on schedule and getting what they need.
Here's our host, Mr. Garrett Lang. You look very well rested today, Garrett.
What's that?
You look very well rested today.
Thank you. I feel like I am pretty well rested considering I've been up since very early. So
yeah.
You deal with preemies, Rayanne?
Yes, I do.
Cool. My daughters were preemies, so.
Yeah, so we have them that they're like born at 22 weeks. They're just like not even the size of the palm of your hand. So
they weren't that far ahead, but
yeah. Yeah. We have them just, and then we have like very a lot of them have a lot of like for their when they go to their doctor and they have the fetal diagnostics done, and they have like very unusual surgeries that have to be performed, sometimes even in utero, before they are born. So yep, we do a lot of things. So what does everybody else do? Michael says he's a dentist.
Yes. Periodontist, actually, but
yeah.
An advanced dentist. Otherwise known as a super dentist.
Well,
yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm not so sure, but thank you.
You are a super dentist. You help me a ton, and you're not even my dentist, and you still help me a ton. So
Okay.
Michael added a little bit to our curriculum about good dental care, and I'll tell you, my dentist was so happy. The last time I came in, he's like, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And I'm like, "Yeah, that was my friend, the periodontist, Michael. He steered me right." So
yeah, I have lichen planus in my mouth from chemo, and so yeah, my dentist is the one who found that. They thought I was just biting my inner cheek, and they're like, "No, it's a white veil." So, and so I do that. Then I was talking with a friend today about our bite splints. We were comparing horror stories with our like sleep guards.
Yeah.
That we only get one per lifetime per, Delta Dental.
Yeah. Well, don't get me started on dental insurance companies.
Yeah, it was. We were just going through about the materials and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, man, wish they just come up with one that it's actually comfortable to wear.
There's all different kinds and different kinds for different people.
Yeah. Yeah, the one they gave him has like it looks like the I can't even think of his name. Gordon. He did the movie The Dentist. Freaked everybody out watching that movie.
Yeah, I know the
Corbin,
guy.
Corbin? Something.
Berenson.
Yeah. And it looks like that. I mean, it's an upper and a lower, and then there's some plastic thing that's keeping the two together. It was so strange looking. I'm like, how do you? So maybe weird looking.
Maybe it's a mandibular repositioning device.
I take mine out in the middle of the night and I don't even know it. It's on my nightstand.
Yeah.
And He's like, oh yeah, I find mine there too. And I'm like, well, yours for sure. I definitely, but that thing is scary looking.
So
So
it
we'd
was
love to hear, people, maybe it sounds like you guys started introducing yourselves before, but maybe we can now get formally into the social, and if people want to introduce yourself and where you're connecting from and what interests you in tonight's topic.
Well, my name is Michael Strasberg. I live in New Jersey. As I said, I'm a dentist. And I'm interested in virtually all the subjects that we talk about because I find them all relevant. I find them all interesting. I find that it's shared with a group of people who have diverse opinions. And so it's a learning experience, and it's a social event for me too, to be with people who are curious about learning, expanding their horizons, having open minds. And so all those things I find gratifying. I feel like people are waiting for me to say something else, but
No, that was good. We're glad to have you. And anyone else want to introduce themselves and what interests them in the topic tonight, Myers-Briggs? Don't all be quiet. Someone must want to introduce themselves.
I'm Jenny.
Good, Jenny. How are you?
Good. How are you? I'm in Florida at the moment. I just moved here from Texas, and I absolutely love Eric's meetings. And it's just extra treat when his daughters come and give him a good night hug.
They could come tonight because we have rainstorms here, so their ice skating lesson was canceled. So hopefully they'll come in and say hi.
Oh, yes. I hope everything will be safe for you guys tonight.
Me too. I hope we don't lose power and get flooded. And
Oh, dear, dear. Yeah, yeah.
the worst case scenario would be that. So.
No, you can just uncheck it.
Anyone else want to introduce themselves?
Oh, good evening. My name is Nargis. I'm new in this group.
Welcome, Nargis. Where are you connecting
Thank
from?
you. Toronto.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm Christine, and I'm coming in from Seattle.
Great. Welcome, Christine.
Thank
And what
you.
interests you, maybe Nargis first, and then Christine afterward in the Myers-Briggs topic. Is this a topic of particular importance, or did you just happen to come to this one?
Well, I've taken the test many times, so just curious as to how it can be applied further. Yeah, so just really open to hearing.
Oh, um,
Cool. What about you, Nargis? Is Myers-Briggs a particularly important topic to you?
I would like to learn more. I've studied psychology, and in one of our courses, explored the Myers-Briggs. Also, when I was a student and I was looking for a job, my career counselor applied it. So I'm open to learning more. Thank you.
Cool. What did they say about Myers-Briggs in your psychology course, out of curiosity? Psychologists normally don't like the test, right? Which I'll talk
Yes.
about that.
Yes, what I remember was that they said that it's a theory, it's considered a theory, and it's very well known and popular among career counselors. But in academic and scientific psychology, we don't use it often because, for example, in therapy, we don't use it often because it's not considered evidence-based, meaning it's not, probably they haven't done enough research the way they expected, that's what I remember, but I'm gonna check again. Maybe now they have done more research.
Got it. Yeah, they have done a lot of research, but I'm going to address I think they've done the wrong research if I'm not wrong. And I'll address why I think that. I think they need to do the right research, and I think they'll find different results, but I think that there's a reason they're not. And I'll go into that as well. So but great, we're starting to have people come in. And anyone else want to introduce themselves and what brings them to the topic of Myers-Briggs?
Sure. This is my first time to any FTI group. Thought I'd give them a go. I got a recommendation from someone else in a different group. I forget who, unfortunately. So no strong interest in this one, except I'll be curious to see why you're pushing, or why it seems like you're more invested in Myers-Briggs specifically when there's other personality tests like Ocean, which everyone seems to like. I don't know why businesses don't use Ocean, but that one's validated and Myers-Briggs isn't. So yeah, that's my starting position, I suppose. Oh, my name is Sam. I don't know if I said that. Hello, I'm in Toronto.
Welcome, Sam. We actually had an event on the Big Five. Carl knows more about the Big Five, and he presented on that. And I enjoyed it. I learned more about the value of the Big Five, but I think they're different. They serve different purposes, actually. And I'll talk a little bit about why I like the Myers-Briggs. But I don't think that you have to like one and not like the other. They're not mutually exclusive. They both have different value, and you can use each one for their own value simultaneously. So I don't think you have to be a hater of one to like the or a hater of one if you like the other. So I like both, to be honest. I like the Myers-Briggs even more, but I'll talk more about the Myers-Briggs and not about the Big Five tonight. Who else wants to introduce themselves and a little bit about what brings you to tonight's event? And thanks, Sam, for coming and trying us out. I hope you'll enjoy the event. And if you don't, let me know why not. And if you do, let me know why you did. So feedback
Hey,
is
how you doing,
welcome,
Garrett?
everyone. So go ahead, Jameson.
Can you first do me the courtesy of allowing me to use my first name
What do you mean?
on my profile? I'm unable to rename it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. But I
yeah,
just want to introduce
we
myself.
turn
My
that
name is
off because
Jameson.
we get trolls sometimes. But I'll turn it on and then let me know when you're done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah, my name is Jameson, and I'm from Southern California. You can look me up. I'm involved with the FTI. I've been involved for a few meetings. I appreciate this particular metric used to evaluate personalities among a population. I'm into demographics and digital demography and that type of marketing information, making it available to provide information for surveys. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for coming. Did you say that you needed to change your name in the chat? Okay, I'm gonna assume that you don't need to change your name because it seemed like it was accurate. So Anyone else want to say hi and where you're
Oh, I was
connecting
changing
from?
it. I'm sorry.
What's that?
I was trying to change it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm
Let me
not
know
good at
when you're done.
multitasking. I haven't figured out what personality type a lack of multitasking would fall under, but that's what I'm here for. Thank you.
No one is a good multitasker, Jameson. No one. Like anyone who says they're a good multitasker, I mean, like maybe 1% of the population is, but no one is really that good at it. I did a test or like a sample class with one of my employers about how bad people are at multitasking and used a very simple example to show how bad people are at multitasking. And it's just not, no one's really that good at it. Some people are better than others though. So um, who else wants to introduce themselves and what brings them to tonight's topic?
Hi, my name's Will. I'm in downtown Queensland, Australia, about 100 miles north of Brisbane. God save the King. And I am apparently an INFPA. I did the test recently. I'm a little bit suspicious about how valid all this is, but I'm an INFPA. I need friendly people, apparently, INFPA. And what I am interested in is the genetic predisposition, the biological determinism, which gives us our personality types as opposed to nurture. So I'm interested in that aspect of it. Thank you.
Cool. I'll talk about whether or not types can change and thanks, Will. Good to see you. Anyone else want to introduce themselves and say where they're connecting from and what interests them in the topic? Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm coming in from Washington, D.C. I'm not the most familiar with the Myers-Briggs. I'm actually more familiar with the Big Five. And I mean, I'm trying to think of what I would be in terms of translating from Big Five to Myers-Briggs, but
there's no translating. It's totally different. Totally different.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, don't try to translate. You'll rack your brain and you won't get anywhere.
Well, as far as the Big Five goes, I would probably say extremely high in openness, moderate in conscientiousness, moderate in extroversion, high in agreeableness, and probably very high in neuroticism. So I guess, but as you said, there's no translation. So I'd have to see where I land on the Myers-Briggs. I'm actually not sure.
Well, after tonight, you can decide whether or not it's worth your time to do. A lot of PhDs in psychology will say it's not. I'm going to try to make a good argument that it is. And if you're curious after tonight's presentation, you can take a free test. I'll tell you a good one, and you can check it out and see if it helps you. I found it very helpful, and I'll go into that in the conversation. But Janet, go ahead. Would love to hear from you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to join. I'm so curious why it would be that the corporate world finds it useful. I mean, they tend to turn to psychology in general as like sort of a vetting process. So anyway, I'll stay tuned. You don't have to answer, but that's just
I will
a question.
answer that. Not right now, but I will answer it. So
yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and the short answer I'll answer now is that because it's useful, that's why we use it. I'm a business background kind of guy. I've been in the corporate world my entire career. So but Katie, go ahead.
That reminds me of a memory where I told somebody, I don't know, it was a long time ago, that HR, I had kind of undervalued what HR does. And how do you know which personalities you're putting together? I think is so important, because so many workplace conflicts could be avoided by not putting two people together.
So maybe, but I'm actually going to try to make an argument that putting people of different backgrounds together is a good thing, even though sometimes there's conflict. I think teaching people how to get along when they are working with different people is the key, rather than putting people only with people who are similar to them. And I'll explain why. So DLJ, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Glad to hear you are as well.
Happy New Year. Haven't seen you.
Happy New Year to you too.
So I thought I'd come along. I redid it recently because there was another session. And somebody sent a link to one I hadn't tried before. And I came out with something different for like, so usually INTJ came out as an INTP. I feel quite suicidal. Oh, and on the, as you know, the big five. So I think I mentioned this before, but I scored 0 on agreeableness, which of course, very surprised to anybody. Yeah, I just wanted Katie's HR comment. It's just the way they use it. They really oughtn't. If they're going to work out how people work together, Belbin is the one. I'm a big fan of Belbin methodology. But as in terms of like holding up a mirror to yourself, I think it's got value in it. And I'm looking forward to what you're going to say. Thanks.
Cool. Bruce, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, thank you. It's very interesting because I did the personality test in 2 different timing and I got different results. I would like to know how valid these tests are, because I got 2 different results. And I don't think your personality really changed that much over time, but there was a big change. So based on the test.
How long of a time period was there between the
maybe
two
like
tests?
6 months apart.
And
so
did you test
think...
out as different types, or like on the scale from one type to the other, were you in a radically different place?
I don't remember exactly, but I think it was like 2 different, like, and I was shocked. And then I was thinking maybe this test is not as valid as it should be, because it gives me totally different answer. And looking back, I was, for both tests, I was very honest. I don't know why it gives me different results.
Right. And it's not about whether or not you were honest. There are a couple of other things that can influence the answers. And I'll explain why I was asking the questions that I was in the presentation, which we'll get into shortly. If there's no one else that wants to speak up, I'll jump into the presentation.
Thank you.
All right. So let me go ahead and introduce myself, because I asked you all to introduce yourselves. So my name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor and now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. And the FTI, we say for short, is a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. And we want to help people be the best versions of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening in the US, and I guess it's Wednesday morning in Australia, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we also have weekly members only events that Michael mentioned, I think, in the social. I will post a link about the FTI so people that want to learn more about us can. We also have an online community that you can join to have conversation through text and voice chat throughout the week. We have only one rule and oh, by the way, the idea of the members events is to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives in order to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair. And we have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. That keeps us all thinking in the logical portion of our brain. And so basically, want to like ask everybody to listen carefully to people, especially if they have different opinions than you, because We learn the most by listening to people who have different opinions. You know, we learn far less by telling them they're wrong and we're right. And so we call that in the FTI listening to understand, where we listen to understand other people and where they're coming from. So that said, I will go ahead and share my screen. Oh, let me put the link in the chat. So for anyone that wants to learn more information about the FTI, there are some links there. We have a little Google Doc to learn more. And then we'll put the presentation up. And just getting all my screens situated. All right, so hopefully you can see the screen. Looks like it's working. So I'll talk about the agenda first. I just gave a quick intro to the FTI, so we'll skip that. Then we'll talk about the benefits of the Myers-Briggs. I'll go into the different types. I'm only going to go through the 4 types. There's a, the 5th that someone mentioned that sort of follows the 4, but the 4 are all I'm going to cover tonight. I'm not as well educated in the 5th, so I don't want to try to present on that, and I didn't research it beforehand. I forgot to do that. We'll cover the 4 sort of dual sides, the 4 different types, and then, or not 4 different types, but the 4 different characteristics. And then I'll talk about the benefits of collaboration across types. And then I'll talk lastly about the detractors and their rationale for being detractors and where I think they're right and wrong to be detractors. So let me set this up. All right. So what is Myers-Briggs? So I'm going to talk about what it is and what it is not. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what Myers-Briggs tries to be versus what it really is. It is a generalization in preferred ways of thinking, or, areas in which you are comfortable and uncomfortable thinking, or ways that you naturally think and you naturally don't think. It's a way of seeing whether or not your team has diverse ways of thinking of things, by seeing that you can come at situations from a variety of perspectives. And it is helpful to know someone's type, because if you do, you can communicate them in a way that's easier for them to understand, which is why I learned about it in General Electric back when we were best managed company in the world. We were taught in the CIO leadership training program about how to use Myers-Briggs to understand the types of executives, and then, when we communicate with those executives, to communicate in a way to them that will be conducive to their type, so that it'll be more well received than if we were just sort of communicating in our type, which is the way most people communicate, is in their own type, which is why Katie rightly mentioned that you usually get along really well with people who are the same type as you, because you communicate the same way, you have the same preferences, so naturally you'll get along with them better. But I'll argue that's actually a bad thing, because seeing things from a different perspective really makes a much more well-balanced team, and it helps you be less likely to get blindsided. What it is not, there is not a clear-cut dichotomy between types. You're not either an I or an E, and that's all there is to it. You'll be somewhere in a spectrum between each of these types. And so the I's are over here, and then the E's are over here. You might be all the way over here near the extreme I, which is where I was early on in my life. And then other people might be, the extreme E. Now I fall kind of in the middle, but slightly on the E side. That answers the question of whether or not types change in your life. They do, but I'll talk more about that later. But basically, it's not a clear, you're either one or the other. It's a range. And so that's why I was asking the person who said that their type changed between tests. If you're in the middle, it's totally normal. Like when you take the test 3 times in a row, like at the same sitting, you could test out, like I could test out between I and E, just based on how I was feeling at the moment. because there are a lot of questions that I will say, well, I could go either way. And depending on which way I go for those 5 questions, I'll either turn out to be an I or an E. And so people in the middle will very often test both letters or different letters, and they'll change back and forth. So it's also not an indicator of a good or bad employee. There is no good or bad in Myers-Briggs. That's one of the things I like about it, and that I have not been as big a fan of in the Ocean test or the Big Five test. In Ocean, there's like high intelligence, low intelligence, right? There's high neurosity, or I forget, high openness and low openness. And like people would say that there are good and bad scores in that test. And the thing that I like about the Myers-Briggs is because there's no good or bad, there's never a reason to game the system, there's never a reason to lie on the questions. All it does is help you, it just serves to help you less if you lie on the questions, because you won't really have an accurate read on what your preferences are. So there's no good or bad in the Myers-Briggs. It should not be used as a decision maker on whether or not to hire someone. I have heard that it actually, I shouldn't say at least not that I've heard of, but because I have heard people claim that it was used as that, but in my experience, it's never really been used as that, and it shouldn't be used as that. That's not really a good use of the score. Like, there are certain jobs that, like, if you're a salesperson and you're a complete introvert, that may be harder to be likely to, harder to be a good salesperson as a complete introvert, because you're meeting strangers all the time. But, the truth is, like, there's a book called Quiet that says some of the best salespeople are introverts, because actually studies show that salespeople are much more effective when they listen more than they talk. And actually introverts are much more likely to listen more than talk. And so, I think the open-minded leader will not rule people out because of their personality. They'll say, I'm going to train this person to take advantage of their personality rather than to rule them out because of it. And and I covered that there's no good or bad. So proponents and addiction. So Fortune 500 companies do use this. Like I said, I was a member of a CIO leadership training program. GE has a number of such leadership programs for different functions. And I went to the training area along with people in other training programs, the financial management program, which was the first of that kind of program. And basically, the reason Fortune 500 companies use it is because they found it really useful. It is very useful in terms of how to get along with people who are different than you. If you can keep track of, if you're good at identifying what someone's type is, and I know people that can do this like that. I don't have that skill, even though I'm trained in like how Myers-Briggs works and how to use it. I'm not always really good at just like paying attention, remembering to pay attention to what their type is. But if you're good at remembering to pay attention to what someone's type is and then modifying your behavior for that, it can be very useful. In addition to the benefits on the is slide in the last slide, it will really help you understand what mannerisms to expect from other people. A lot of people may just think, well, I don't like that type of person. And I would encourage people to not feel that way when you're talking about the different types of Myers-Briggs personalities, because the truth is, as I talked about with listening to understand, you learn the most from the people who are different than you. And that's true with Myers-Briggs as well. If you're an introvert, you'll learn a lot from extroverts. And if you're an extrovert, you'll learn a lot from introverts. The Myers-Briggs will explain that these are just different preferences. And if both you and your counterparty understand those differences and understand that you have those differences, and that you'll be able to laugh about them rather than feel like it's a point of tension, and that you're just not like jiving with each other. You may not just jive with each other, but if you understand why you're each different and you make an effort to get along with someone who is different than you, which I would argue we should all try to do, especially in this time of political tension when people are, fighting each other tooth and nail, just because of differences. I think we're all better off listening to people with differences rather than just avoiding people who are different than us. So now I'm going to go into the different types. So first is introvert versus extrovert. For introverts, a description of introverts is that they get energy from being alone. If you feel burnt out when you're amongst a group of people, but you feel like you get energized when you're alone, chances are good you're an introvert. They prefer small groups of close friends and to interacting with new people. And they're usually not that talkative around strangers or in crowds, but they are very talkative amongst a group of close friends. So an introvert might look like an extrovert when they're amongst a group of close friends and be talking nonstop. I have friends like that will talk to me nonstop, but then put them in a group of people that they don't know, and they'll immediately be super quiet and not talk to anyone and not say a word. She's an extreme introvert. So basically areas to flex. And I like to recommend areas to flex so that if people, once you know your type, you'll want to keep in mind that if you are like a strong introvert, you'll benefit from pushing yourself to meet new people, both in personal life and work, to build social networks, because introverts will tend to not build extensive social networks. And there's a lot of benefit in the modern world to having an extensive social network. And so you kind of have to push yourself to do that. And you also have to remember to be willing to speak up in a group of extroverts. I'll give a story. When I was in that leadership training program, learning about the Myers-Briggs, I was in a group with 4 extroverts and me. And these 4 people would just talk. And for about 9 minutes, they all talked and I didn't say one word. And then after the 9 minutes, I said, guys, could I say something? And they were like, yeah, go ahead. And then I basically summarized what everyone had said and gave the takeaway and said, this is what I think we should do. And they're all like, yeah, that's it. And so what I learned from that is the reason that, I learned to speak up because I realized that they were extroverts. And so they were going to keep talking. And what I also learned, which I remember now as an extrovert, testing out, I'm an ambivert extrovert, so I'm only slightly extroverted, but is that the introverts can often get drowned out in the chatter of extroverts. And so if you're an introvert, try to remember to push yourself to speak up. If you have something valuable to say, people will value it if you speak up, but you have to take the initiative to say it, because, there's not always going to be a leader in the room. Like when I notice in a team meeting someone being quiet, I'll often say, so, Joe, what do you think? And I'll ask the person that hasn't said anything what their opinion is, because I know that when I was an introvert, I was that person that, often I was the person that wasn't speaking up in a meeting. And, I went through many meetings not saying anything because I just never felt like I had a chance to speak up, and I didn't push myself to. Now, I did spend a lot of my career pushing myself to do these things. And that's why I now test out as a slight extrovert, because I started getting to extrovert where I got energy from groups of people, because the more people I got to know, the more I liked people that I got to know. And I realized, wow, I don't have to be keeping to a small group of people that I'm comfortable with. I can get to know new people and enjoy meeting them. And so extroverts tend to have a larger number of friends, sometimes with less deep relationships. And they're usually outgoing, gregarious, very friendly with strangers. Strong E's are often the life of the party. So those are the people that are, jokesters and just getting along with everyone. Not always getting along with everyone, but certainly not intimidated by meeting totally new people. The areas to flex are to practice active listening. They need to, spend more time listening. Extroverts like to talk a lot, and it's good to, like I said, ask the introverts what their opinions are, because they often have the most valuable things to say. And then remember to build deep relationships with people, because you know, superficial relationships aren't as valuable as deeper relationships. And I think extroverts can tend to move to the next person very quickly. And it's worth, you know, having some depth of relationship. And sometimes extroverts forget that. Next is intuitive versus sensing. I guess the intuitive is what I'm going to go into first. We're more abstract and big picture oriented. I'm an intuitive, and we think about possibilities. We're dreamers and futurists. We find patterns in sets of data. So we can look at a data set. And I did this at another event is, well, that's probably a critical thinking example, but either way, we find patterns in data, and from a flexing perspective, it's important to stay grounded in reality. And I'll post an essay here when I say stay grounded in reality. It's an essay called Why I'm a Realistic Idealist and Why You Should Be One Too. I think that realist versus realist versus idealist is a false dichotomy. You actually can get the best of both worlds. And by the way, I'm seeing people are writing me direct messages. I'm not going to notice the chat stuff during the event because I'm too busy hosting and talking and moderating. And so I tend not to notice the text chat very much. So if someone needs my attention, feel free to speak up and I'll try to deal with it. But otherwise, I won't be able to. So you can take a look at that, and I think hopefully you'll find it valuable. Next is intuitive people benefit, and I do this all the time, from creating force rank prioritized lists, where the most important thing is at the top, and then you prioritize it, and then you basically outline a set of steps that you need to do, and then follow that set of steps. And it keeps us grounded and focused on tangible steps forward. In the FTI curriculum, we have a set of lectures that I've done, and Michael did one as well, since he's a periodontist, on dental care, and then I've done a bunch on other stuff, and we'll have other members add other knowledge and wisdom to the curriculum. And one of them is I teach something on how to achieve your life's goals in a state of positive flow. So it's kind of a set of goal setting techniques, and keeping focused on your life's goals and how to make tangible progress on them. And it includes force rank prioritizing lists in a way that keeps people moving in the right direction. And then next is trying to think what's the next step to move in the right direction. You don't want to get too lost in the clouds. It's great to dream and it's great to ideate, but you also need to execute. And people say that there are two types of people. There are the dreamers and the execution people. I think my essay on Why I'm a Realistic Idealist says that some of us can be both, and I'm trying to prove that out with my business, and we'll see if I can succeed. So next is sensing people, much more focused on the present and detail-oriented, relying on concrete, tangible information and valuing practical implications. Be open, from a flexing perspective, you want to be open to new ideas and revolutionary thinking. The sensing people can tend to be the naysayers, where they go, oh, you're dreaming too big. That's just not possible. It's impossible. And I will tell you, every year of my career, I've had someone tell me that something I wanted to do was impossible. And I will tell you, every single time we found a way to do it. So like, anything is possible if you set your mind to it and you get enough people collaborating on it. Just about anything is possible. The sensing people would benefit from remembering that, and reading the how to be a realistic idealist essay would benefit them too. Now you don't want to be like so unrealistic that what you're trying to bite off is more than you can chew, and you have to go step by step. But if you start with the next step in a direction that may seem very ambitious, I like the saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And if you keep taking steps in the right direction, eventually you'll go that 1,000 miles if you have good planning and good execution. Next is collaborate with intuitives, and I'll say this at the end of the lecture too, is collaborate with intuitives to complement each other. This is where, yeah, you're, as a sensing person, you're gonna get along more with the sensing people, but if you push yourself to collaborate with intuitives, you can be the execution person to an intuitive's dreams, right? And that's what is looked at in the entrepreneurship world as the complementary visionary versus execution person, the Jobs and the Wozniak, right? And so you know, it's good to have diversity of Myers-Briggs types. Next is thinking and feeling. I'm a thinking. I used to be a very strong thinking. Now I type out in the middle. I mentioned this because one of our, you know, what I am, because one of our groups is a Myers-Briggs thing, and so that we advertise to. We advertise to a number of groups, not just the FTI group, and so I'll mention it for that. So thinking people are very logical and rational, and they often, I should say, we often forget to put ourselves in other people's shoes. I now test out occasionally as an F, but usually as a T, but not nearly as strong as a T earlier. But I would argue that's just because I empathize more with other people than I did when I was younger. And I have spent a lot of effort trying to put myself in other people's shoes and being able to consciously try to empathize with other people and think about how the decisions that I make are going to affect different people. And I think that's a beneficial thing to do as a thinker. And if you surround yourself with feeling people, you will naturally get that feedback from them, which is, again, strength and diversity. You want to learn from that perspective of the feeling people. You know, the example that they gave in the leadership training that I did is they said, suppose that you're the CEO, and I still remember this was over 20 years ago, but it was very meaningful to me. Suppose that you're the CEO of a company and you want to change the headquarters of the company. What are you going to think about? And he asked all of us on, you know, we were separated on sides of the room. And one side of the room, my side, was the thinking side. And then the other side was the feeling side. And then he asked us afterwards to, you know, both sides of the room, one at a time, to think about the things that they would think about. And the thinking side, we were like, well, how much does it cost? What's the cost of real estate? You know, and you know, can we get good talent there? You know, very logical types of things. And then the feeling side was like, well, what about people's families? Are they going to be able to relocate? Are we going to be able to retain them? Like a very different set of criteria, which are also super important. Like all of those ideas are important. And if you have only one of those perspectives represented, you're going to make a one-sided decision, not a decision, you know, fully thought through. So next, you know, good careers for thinkers are finance, law, and engineering. I was an engineer, so it made sense when I was a strong thinker. And then feeling empathetic and harmonious, thrive in people-caring roles like teaching, counseling, and HR. They're good at putting themselves into other people's shoes and seeing other perspectives. And I would argue to flex, they would benefit from learning from the more logically oriented thinking folks and trying to see that different perspective that they don't naturally gravitate towards. Now, the next criteria or dichotomy is judging versus perceiving. Judging folks, and I'm a strong judging, are organized and decisive. We make short, medium, and long-term plans. Like I'm a planner. Like I naturally put everything into short, medium, and long-term plans. And to flex, it's really, you know, I try to think of this because I'm a strong judging person. When curveballs come, I'm not always as quick to adapt as I should be. And so I try to empower perceiving people to be able to lead when a curveball comes in, because that will help them adapt more quickly than maybe I will. Or I can try to get better at adapting more quickly, which I am also trying to do, and I think I've gotten better at. But still more room to grow there. And good roles for judging people are leadership, project management, and roles requiring planning. Next is perceiving, which is flexible and spontaneous. These are the people that, plan a trip. The way that a perceiving person will plan a vacation is, where are you going? Well, I'm going to land in Milan and I'm going to come back from Barcelona. What are you doing in between? Not sure yet. Figure it out when I get there. That's like, there's no planning. It's just like, I'm going to go and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to be spontaneous. And some people love that. Whereas for me, I'll plan morning, afternoon, plans for every day on my vacation. Exactly where am I going to be? How am I going to get from one place to the next? And often down to if I have the time, where am I going to eat my meals? Because I'm a foodie, I have a food tech company, so I'll research copiously where are the best places to get the best meals and what am I going to order there. Perceiving people are great in dynamic environments. Journalism, event planning, and creative arts are all very dynamic types of careers. And to flex, it's good to think about time management and organization, and to consider collaborating with judging people, because there's a complement here, right? All structure and no spontaneity is not good. All spontaneity and no structure is also not good. Really, you want a balance of structure, but then being able to be spontaneous within that structure if things aren't working out. And so, I might make short, medium, and long-term plans, but then my friend Sally might say, hey, Garrett, this plan doesn't seem to be working out. What if we did this other alternative? And she's the perceiving type. And so she kind of steers things in a different direction than our original plan. And me letting her do that, even if I'm, in charge, would be a good sign of leadership, because I'm actually benefiting from the complementary nature of her P and my J. And this is where I say that the balanced team is the most effective team, as long as everybody knows about the types. But you have to be aware of the types, and that you are separate types, and that you're intentionally being conscious to be open to people with a different type, because otherwise I might, as a manager, if I'm unaware of those types, think Sally's trying to do my job. Why is she trying to take over? But really, what Sally's trying to do is adapt to a last minute change that I'm just not as adept at adapting to. And so this is where Myers-Briggs is extremely effective in understanding differences and being able to set aside ego and understand that differences are actually beneficial when you accept them and you embrace them rather than try to resist them and fight them. So this is where I was saying, in my early 20s, I was here on an extreme I. When I got to my late 20s, I tested out as a slight E on extroversion. And so this is like an example of, an I is over here and E is over here. Now, even though both of these are, both this one and this one are E's, these are not the same E. They're totally different. I'm an ambivert E, whereas someone who tests out over here will be uncomfortable being alone. They're going to always want to be surrounded by other people. And if they're alone, they're going to feel lonely and they're going to feel, uncomfortable. And so these aren't the same type of E. Now, for me as an E here, if I take the test another time, I might test out as an I. And I'll talk about a little later how PhDs in psychology don't really get this spectrum thing. And they think that because, because someone tests out as an E one test and an I another test, somehow the test is wrong and inconsistent. That's actually not the case. What the case is that you shouldn't deviate too much on the spectrum. Now, if you're deviating from here to here to here in 3 different versions of the test, I would argue something else is probably going on, which might be on a later slide, but I'm going to mention it now because we're on it. When we got trained in the Myers-Briggs, we were told specifically to take the test as we think about ourselves at work. And we should think of every question that we answer with the frame of mind, how would I respond to this while I'm at work? Your responses when you're at work may be very different from your responses when you're at home and on your personal time. And so if you are testing out radically differently, I would say you may not have the appropriate context, and you may be answering some questions in one context and other questions in another context. You should always have the context in mind when you're answering questions in the Myers-Briggs test, because we all like respond differently in different situations and environments. And so you want to have a very clear context when you're answering the questions in the Myers-Briggs test. So above all, the MBTI is really about differences in thinking and how we can complement each other, as I've been sort of talking about throughout this presentation. And really, I can't say enough how important it is for the extremes to talk and collaborate empathetically and learn from each other and benefit from each other's different perspective. And that's where I say listening to understand is your friend. Listen to why that other person has their perspective. They will have a different perspective than you. That's okay. When it comes to making a decision, if you've listened to the extremes on both sides and everyone in the middle, then you're going to make a much better decision having heard everybody's perspective, rather than you will from having one person make the decision from only one perspective. So criticisms of the MBTI, there are many, and I'm going to go through them one at a time. If you Google the Myers-Briggs test, you will see a lot of PhDs in psychology saying it's a bad test. We talked about that in the beginning in the social. Let's talk about the criticisms that people lay on the MBTI. One is lack of reliability. Like if you retest, you test the same. I kind of already handled that, I think, a little proactively, but I'll mention it again briefly. Next is lack of validity. Does the test measure what it claims to measure? Next is forced binary choices. The criticism is that the MBTI forces people into binary categories without regard to scale. Hopefully you know by now that that's not true. Or at least that it's a misunderstanding of the Myers-Briggs to even claim that in the first place, because that's not how the Myers-Briggs works. Then next is lack of predictive power, and that it doesn't predict behavior effectively. Next is that the MBTI considers that people have static types and can never change. I've already alluded to the answer to that one. Next is the origins and development, that the originators were not formally educated in psychology. Myers and Briggs were not indeed educated in psychology. And next is that it's commercial and that people make money teaching about the Myers-Briggs test. And next is that it has pop psychology appeal because it's used frequently in industry, but not as much in academia or clinical psychology. So let's handle those one at a time. Lack of reliability, I'll be brief on because I've kind of already covered it. It's a spectrum, not binary. And so if you're in the middle of the spectrum, you're going to change type very regularly, not surprising at all. By the way, I looked for the other thing that I mentioned is the perspective that you're answering about, like whether it's a work perspective or a at-home perspective. I have not seen any studies that actually control for perspective, which I found interesting, and then testing reliability after controlling for perspective. And reliability without context is actually moderate to moderate high. I would imagine that controlling for perspective, it will get even significantly higher. This is a link to a study that shows that the reliability actually is reasonably high. It's not as high as ocean, apparently, but it is high enough to be significantly high. Next is MBTI lacks validity, which means that it's not good at measuring what it claims to measure. From personal experience, I can say that it falls completely flat. I mentioned the example in that leadership class where basically, they took us with each one of these 4 categories and put us on both sides of the room. And they did that same exercise with every single one of them. And I will tell you, we all felt like BFFs with the people on our side of the room. And then we felt like the other side of the room were just a bunch of crazy people. And it was like the whole, the whole session was like that. And it predicted what our preferences were so well that it created a mini tribalism in the room on the two sides of the room. And this study actually shows the same thing, that it actually is a good predictor of behavior. This second study also shows that it's a good predictor of behavior. And so, I think and so that's that for that. So next is lack of predictive power. The MBTI, that they claim that the MBTI is not indicative of behavior. There was actually some studies that show the opposite in my research, and it basically showed that there's a strong correlation between MBTI types and behavior in the workplace. And so, I'll explain why it seems like there are studies contradicting the claims of psychologists in a second, in a little bit later. But next is the claims that MBTI is static over time are criticized. It's a valid criticism. People who think the Myers-Briggs is static over time just have a misunderstanding about the Myers-Briggs. There are people who claim that once you're born with a certain Myers-Briggs, it will never change in your life. I guarantee that's wrong, because mine has drastically changed and I know it and feel it. And having been trained on it early in life, and with like an extreme I and an extreme T, and now testing out as in the middle on both of those categories, I like that difference is so tangible and so real that, nothing is going to convince me otherwise at this point, because my personal experience, like I know for as much as I know reality is real, which many people still doubt, but let's not get into that. We talked about that another night on our topic of objective reality, and I made a good argument that even if we live in a simulation, the winning strategy is to treat it as reality. But I'm digressing, and that's my intuitive side that's making connections between things. And so because I've changed from strong categories to mid test, I know that the Myers-Briggs can change over time from personal experience. And so, anyone saying otherwise is, in my opinion, wrong. Next is the origins and development. And I think this really explains, and I learned this from a PhD in psychology who was presenting on the Myers-Briggs, and I asked him, I'm like, everything I read about from PhDs in psychology is that they hate the Myers-Briggs. And I said, why is that? And he said, Garrett, it's because it wasn't invented by a PhD in psychology. The reason they love ocean is because it was invented by PhDs in psychology. Isabel Briggs Myers and her mother, Catherine Cooks Briggs, were the ones that created the Myers-Briggs, and they weren't educated in psychology formally at all. And so the psychology profession simply doesn't respect people who aren't PhDs in psychology. And even though the test has been proven by Fortune 500 companies to be really valuable and useful, and hopefully I've explained a bunch of things that resonated with you guys, and maybe when I explained these types, you could even guess for yourself where you type out, even if you haven't taken the test. I would bet that you probably could, and take the test and see if you were right. It's a great test. And my guess is that you probably typed yourself well if you had a high degree of confidence that you were right. And so this, I think, describes why the psychology field has not liked the Myers-Briggs test. Is that a good reason for not liking Myers-Briggs? I personally don't think so. I don't care who comes up with an idea. And that's part of what the Freethinker Institute is about, is let everybody come up with all the ideas that they want and can come up with, and then let each person decide for ourselves which ones we think are valuable. Someone doesn't have a PhD to have a valuable opinion. I've learned more about certain philosophy topics from people who hadn't graduated high school than I did from people who were PhDs in philosophy. I met a PhD in philosophy who said the whole idea of anything being more right or less right than anything else is complete nonsense. And quite frankly, I think that's complete nonsense. That's like saying, torturing innocent babies is a-okay from her perspective, and saying that torturing innocent babies is bad is complete nonsense is crazy for me. So, but we'll talk about that another night on objective morality. So, giving a sneak preview. So criticism that popularity is from commercial profit motives is a fascinating one. Yes, people make money training on MBTI. It's useful in corporate America, so corporations are going to want to pay people. And so there is a profit motive and there is marketing. And they claim that there's no scientific validity, but I also showed studies showing scientific validity. So I guess we kind of know that that claim isn't quite true. But also keep in mind, people make money on the Big Five or Ocean, which is the PhD's favorite test. So the fact is, you can't, this is the pot calling the kettle black, because the PhD's favorite test has exactly the same situation, except it's not as widely adopted by the Fortune 500 leaders, because I'd argue it's not as useful. And also there is a good and bad result. And so it's, more likely that someone's going to try to game the test in the Big Five than it is in the Myers-Briggs, when there's no good or bad and there's no benefit. It only harms you to game the test or to lie on the answers. Next is pop psychology appeal. There are criticisms that PhDs in psychology don't use the test, but corporations do. And that's what they say is the claim, that it's pop psychology. But I have kind of a different read on this. The PhDs in psychology are shunning it just because it wasn't invented in psychology. Just because they shun it doesn't mean it's invalid. And in fact, I'd argue that the studies that have been done on it do show that it's valid. And the studies that show that it's invalid basically do things like saying, but people test out as an I and an E in separate tests, so it's not valid. But that's a complete misunderstanding of the test. It really shocks me to hear that that's one of the criticisms, because it's from someone that doesn't even have a rudimentary knowledge of how the Myers-Briggs works. So just because they shun it doesn't make it a bad test, in my opinion. The level of tribalism is fascinating, and for me, that's throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as the U.S. saying, the American saying goes. So, which means throwing away a good thing, because there's something you don't like about it, like you don't want the bathwater, but don't throw out the baby, which is valuable. So next, that's the end of the presentation. So all questions are welcome, as is feedback. Would love to know in the chat if people are willing to write. Was this helpful? Did you learn something? Will you apply this to your daily life? How will you apply it? And then the next thing I'll say is we're going to go into the Q&A session. I'm going to take I'm going to need a quick break in a minute. I'm going to try to hang on, but I guess let's see. Let me stop sharing and just ask people to share in the chat if it was useful. And so just if people didn't follow throughout, I'll put my type into the chat. I'm an ENTJ. We're a small but raucous bunch. And I need to step away for 2 minutes. I'll be right back. And Michael, let me actually join from my earbuds so I can listen. But I have a quick thing to handle, and then I'll be right back.
Would you like me to?
Yeah,
take
can
over?
you just maybe just let people make commentary
Okay.
if they'd like any kind of reflections, opinions on what people heard. I would just love to hear people's reflections if people want to comment.
Sam, would you like to speak?
Yeah, sure. This is my first time here, so I wasn't sure exactly what the protocol was, but I think I can probably cover the 2 minutes before Garrett is back. So yeah, I've made a few notes. Stop me if I start talking too much, I guess. I have a bunch of notes to go through. But I'm going to be pretty combative, and maybe that's just my Aries horoscope showing through. Who knows? But yeah, so I think the big one for me is Myers-Briggs has been shown to not be predictive. And like, that's a really big problem. If it can't predict anything, what are we doing? You know, like that's a huge problem. I will, to Garrett's credit, I appreciate that he had all those slides about all of the different detractions, like the 8 different detractions. That's really, you know, showing both sides of the argument. I definitely appreciate that. I disagree with a couple of the ways that some of them were characterized. Mostly the origins one. Garrett characterized it as being about status, like people don't like it because they weren't PhDs, and I think that's setting up like a sort of outrage bait, in the sense like setting up this false dichotomy of like elites versus normal people or something like that, and that's just not the case. It's more like the fact that they weren't psychologists is more to the point that they kind of just made up the categories. Introvert versus extrovert is a real spectrum. The others they just kind of made up, as far as I know, like feeling versus judgment, and you know, like the others, they just made them up. Like there's no backing at all for any of those 3 spectrums. So that's like, what are we doing? We're just making stuff up here. Those were the main points that I had. Garrett mentioned it's been proven by corporations. We have to be careful with our language here. It hasn't been proven by corporations. They just like it. You know, and I can see why people like it, because it's like horoscopes, and those are fun, and people self-identify with those things, and like they start to. There's confirmation bias, basically. You know, once we, like, I know that I'm Aries, and now suddenly I get, whenever I feel myself being combative, it's like, oh, it's you know, that's because of this thing that I've been told, this category that I've been told that I belong to. And yeah, like Gary had that anecdote about being separated into 2 groups and tribalism formed. Like another good example of like confirmation bias. I think that, you know, the tribalism would have formed no matter what groups they were in. You know, there's no test being done there where, like, if they were in different groups, that tribalism wouldn't have formed. It's going to form no matter what groups you put into. That's how human nature works.
So
I'll stop there.
Yeah, so
Hi, Garrett.
I don't know if Michael went through the rules, but we want to keep comments and questions to one topic at a time, so that we can you know, respond you know, in line, and then you know, each time you raise your hand you can ask another question, and so you can always raise your hand as many times as you want, but each time you raise your hand, just focus on one thing at a time. As far as tribalism always occurring, yes, but what you won't typically get is such homogenous answers, which is what I don't think, I don't know if you realize, or maybe I didn't explain it well, but what ended up happening in those 2 sides of the room is that everybody on my side of the room agreed with me about that topic, and we had all like very similar opinions, and we all had the opposite opinions of the people on the other side of the room. And that is not normal. Like that, like you can't do that with any other like sort of you know, like I don't even think you can do that with the big 5, quite frankly, because you know, what you're not going to find that in a particular scenario, like in moving the office of a company, like people with high intelligence and low intelligence, they're not going to all come up with the same ideas as other high intelligence and low intelligence people. It doesn't work that way, right? Like, you know, they're not going to feel this big affinity to the people on their side of the room. Does that make sense, Sam?
I just disagree. I think neither of us really have much to back up our position on that point. I'm happy to just like concede that point. I don't think that was the most important of the points that I made. So
I didn't hear it all. I apologize. I had to step away for 2 minutes. Was there another one that you wanted me to respond to?
The main one was about the predictive nature of it, and the status dichotomy that you proposed, where like you're claiming that people don't like it because like the PhDs don't like it because it wasn't by a fellow PhD or something like.
That's what a PhD told me, actually. That came from him.
Yeah, so I don't want to repeat it for everyone else too much, but basically, the point there was that as far as I know, the two people that made it, just aside from introvert versus extrovert, the other three categories have no scientific backing. They just liked those dichotomies, those spectrums, and they made them from virtually nothing. And that's a big problem, I think. And that's why people don't, when they say like it wasn't made by psychologists, it's because they just, they weren't backing it in anything from the psychology literature, as far as I know.
Carl Jung was the originator of most of the content that went into the Myers-Briggs. So Jamie mentioned that in the chat. And yeah, like he was a well-researched person, pretty famous guy in psychology. So
yeah, I mean, he has good parts and bad parts,
Yeah, he does.
I wouldn't call it scientific, but yeah. Well, and then you mentioned, like, you said that it's been proven by corporations. Just to be clear with our language here, it hasn't been proven. It's been proven to not be predictive. Corporations like it. I'm not arguing that. We just have to be careful. We can't say it's been proven by corporations because it hasn't.
I would actually say that it's been proven as useful by corporations because people like me have used it in our careers to great effect. And we have seen that the types actually do influence like how people respond in different situations. And we've used it in practical ways on a regular basis, far more than most, PhDs in psychology are probably using things in practical ways. Like in business, your PhDs in psychology are often in academia or running tests, but the studies that I posted actually show that it has also been proven to be predictive and have predictive power. And so I would encourage you to watch we had a video on confirmation bias, and it's a very good thing to kind of be conscious of and aware of. We all have confirmation bias, and you may want to look for reasons that you're wrong rather than reasons that you're right. And I'll do the same. And I'm curious why you're so skeptical when I can cite a bunch of studies backing up what I'm saying. I'm curious why you're so skeptical, I guess.
I haven't seen those studies that you linked, but there's just many, many more studies that show the opposite, right? So we've got a problem there. I could be wrong. Like if the ones you linked are more recent and they debunk the older ones, it's possible. I haven't heard about that. So yeah, it is possible. I can have a look at those links if the slides have the links in them.
Cool.
I guess just to know where you're coming from a little bit more, what's your personal position on horoscopes?
Bobson.
Horoscopes. So horoscopes are very different than the Myers-Briggs. Like, how do I answer that? Like, it's entertainment. Like, horoscopes are generally written, it depends on what horoscope you're talking about. If you're talking about like the daily horoscope in a paper or something like that, it's
like your star sign. Like I'm being very combative right now because I'm Aries, perhaps.
Right. So,
do you think there's some validity?
I've read like 5 different horoscopes that all resonate with me. And so, I'm an Aries and Aries resonates with me, but I can like look at 3 other horoscope signs that also resonate with me. Whereas like when I tested out as a strong I, an E absolutely did not resonate with me in any way, shape, or form. And now that I test out as an ambivert, both the I and the E both resonate with me. So, I think the horoscope is a very different and, falsifiably different paradigm where there's not a right and a wrong horoscope. They're all kind of written so generally that, different ones are going to apply to different people, and different parts of descriptions apply to me in different horoscopes. So that answers your question, but let me let Will go next, and then we have multiple hands up. So, but Sam, if I missed any of your other ones, feel free to raise your hand again, and I'm happy to try to comment.
Sure, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep.
Oh, thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I really liked what Sam said. I thought I was one of the most clever chaps in Australia, but now there's another contender, it seems. That's a joke, everyone. You must be very careful making jokes, Sam, because people get offended at the slightest joke. It's an attack on their self-esteem. So I don't know if it's an Australian thing or not, but we must be careful. Look out. There's one now. Look out. Someone unmuted. Excuse me, someone's unmuted. Is this an interruption?
What's that?
From my friend Kay. My dear, dear friend Kay is about to tell me why I shouldn't have just said that, I think. Anyway, she tends to tell me just about everything I say I shouldn't say, which is I find that entertaining and part of the reason I like this group. But Sam, I do agree with what you say. I want to reiterate, I think Garrett is absolutely scintillatingly brilliant. I've just come to the conclusion that he is a remarkable guy, like just blows me away. I think sometimes he gets it quite wrong with some things. And to be totally honest, Garrett, I know you value honesty and respect, and I'm just blown away by your intellect. Like you could probably be president of the United States, I think. I really mean that. But I think what can come with such talent is a reaffirmation of one's views. And I think sometimes you are a little bit overly convinced of your stance on some things in regards, say, karma is something you adhere to or espouse. Also, the horoscope thing, I think you do tend to give that some credence, which is fine, but none of it's based in science. I think we just have to be a little bit more scientifically respectful, if that makes sense. But I just wanted to say that it was so interesting what Sam said, that he now has a dossier of counter evidence to your claims of the benefits of the Myers-Briggs. And that's interesting. So maybe you could sort of somebody could objectively look at all the analysis. This is a good potential for artificial AI. It can just objectively review things and take the whole human ego and personality out of it. And that perhaps in the future, it'll make all political decisions with no ego and just be programmed to make the greater good, to make all decisions based on the least amount of suffering for all individuals and all beings. But anyway, I'm going off on a diatribe. I really liked what Sam said. And just quickly wanted to say personalities are so complicated. I worked in management and the merchant marine. It was like working on a pirate ship. We had a crew of 100 people. I had to manage all types of lunatics, of which I am one, which really helps when you're managing other lunatics. It helps to be a bit psycho yourself, and but a benevolent psycho. And what I found was that the nuances and gradations of the various personality types is so myriad that it cannot be defined with a simple 4 letters. And also self-esteem comes into play, past history, and I'll shut up now because I've gone way over 2 minutes, so I apologize. But what's fascinating is I had to collate people to work in teams. And I knew immediately that this guy can't work with that guy, and this woman can't work with that woman because of the various myriad variations in personality, and it's very complicated. And often you just get it from having a 1-minute chat with someone. You can get much more of an assessment of their personality than some perhaps slightly narcissistically driven personality tests, which these sort of things do seem to attract narcissists, of which many we have an abundance of.
Right, well,
I'll stop now.
You're
Thank
way
you.
over your time, my friend.
Shut up as well. I'll stop. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't give much credence to horoscopes, as I said, Will, so I don't know why you're saying that after I just said that 4 horoscopes resonate with me. Like, like, how can you say that I follow horoscopes when I gave that answer? I mean, I don't have anything against people who like horoscopes. I find them fun to read, but you know, that's all. They don't have the predictive power.
Whatsoever?
What's that?
Do you give them any credence whatsoever? Horoscopes? Do you?
What do you mean
'Cause
by
I
give them
just-
credence? Like, I don't make decisions based on horoscopes. No.
Right, so you pretty well think it's bunkum in the main.
I think they're entertaining to read if I have nothing else to do, which is pretty
Okay.
rare in my life.
I
So
got that wrong. I apologize if I got that wrong. I'm sorry.
yeah, that's okay. You got a bunch of other stuff wrong too, but I didn't take all the notes. So but let me let Rose go next because we have a bunch of hands up.
Hi, thank you so much. Garrett, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. It was great. I'm also Aries, so I have to argue with you, Garrett and Sam. So we can all argue here.
Well, yeah, we Aries like to argue. Oh, so no, sorry, I couldn't resist just to.
But I tend to love your presentation. I think it was very informative and very good because it shows that you have to reflect on your test. And I think you're absolutely right that all those four categories, you have a spectrum, and everyone is in some sort of spectrum, like all of those personalities are in spectrum, and also it depends on the context. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Also regarding the horoscope, I think the difference between the horoscope and this test is probably that people that are looking at horoscope is to kind of like predict, like for example, for the relationship, they want to predict something or get to know somebody. But this particular test, I believe it's not for prediction, as Sam mentioned. This is not for prediction. This is just another information to get to know yourself. And when I looked at that way, I think it's very informative. At least it's good that you have some idea about yourself. There is no prediction here. Also, there is another one that comes after it. For example, INTP, then dash A or B. You didn't talk about that. If you can talk about that. So,
say that again.
There is another letter that comes after it. For example, A comes after it. For me, A came after the 4 letters, which was like assertive, through assertiveness. I don't know, maybe they add into this test, but I think there is another layer to that.
Yeah, let me come back to that one. But I will say there is actually supposed to be some level of predictive nature to the MBTI. And one of the studies that I showed, it's actually not just a study. I think it was if I remember right, this one was a meta study. So it went over a large number of studies and looked at the ones that were relevant to predictability and looked at the fact that people's Myers-Briggs actually did have a level of predictability in terms of how people would respond in different situations. And so there is a level of predictability to the Myers-Briggs according to those studies. And those studies are in the I put in the chat the presentation, which has all the studies that I found in my research, which, by the way, I do always look for reasons that I'm wrong in my research for these events. And I didn't find overwhelmingly convincing evidence that the PhDs were right, but yeah, and let me come back. Go ahead.
Just like horoscope, it's not, you should look at all of these information in open mind. You shouldn't just be like, okay, my horoscope doesn't align with this person, so I cannot have a relationship with this person. It's just another information that you get. If you want to look at it as far as entertainment, that's one thing. If you want to get to know yourself or to know other people, that's another thing. But it can't always be like 100% that you can always just say, 100% this is right. And as you mentioned, people change, the context that they are thinking when they are doing this test change. So, and also the spectrum. So this is not just like it's in gray area. It's not just black and white. Also, I wanted to know how can you share the slides, because I think they were
Yeah, I
very
did
good.
share them. I'll share them again in case,
Thank
because
you.
it's probably like back in the chat, and it took me, yeah, I'll share them again. And to answer your question about the last letter, it's assertive or turbulent. Assertive people are self-assured. They tend to be more relaxed and less affected by stress and pressure. Emotional response, like they maintain emotional stability. From a risk-taking perspective, they're more willing to take risks and resistant to worrying about the consequences. And they're often more content with achievements and less likely to be affected by societal expectations or competition. Whereas turbulent people are, self-reflective, more self-conscious and sensitive of their own weaknesses and shortcomings, maybe more prone to stress, and have more emotional reactions to circumstances. They tend to be perfectionists, and be highly driven and constantly pushing themselves to improve, and have maybe more influenced by external feedback and societal pressure. So those are the general categories. I don't love those because, those don't feel like a clear dichotomy to me like the other four, to be honest. Like when I read those two answers, like pieces of both of those resonate with me. And so I just don't find it as useful as the first four. So I think those were added later. I could be wrong, but
Yeah, I think so too. Because
yeah.
in previous tests, they didn't have that. So I think they added it
Yeah.
later on, maybe last 2 years. But thank you so much for the great presentation. Thank you very much.
No problem. Jameson, how are you? Thanks, Rose.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. I was listening to the presentation and I appreciated it. I know that like there are four major groupings of a bunch of subcategory groups when I did a research, and there's kind of a correlation in that sense. I know someone was talking about these metrics correlating with other metrics of behavior. And as far as being predictive, I'm pretty sure knowing somebody's, whether they're avoidant or outgoing or type of thing could definitely predict, a behavior in the future if you were to look at it, in context with other information and you were wanting to predict someone's behavior. So I believe that for sure. And, the horoscope one, I've always been fascinated by that. Because I know that like that test in a horoscope, I don't think the star alignment when I'm born has as much impact as like the immediate environment around me, and that would probably have some kind of effect. So from the perspective of a horoscope, I definitely don't think so. But there is obviously to me some understanding that might be what that represents more. Just when about where you're born in your environment versus like when a star is positioned. But yeah, so I appreciate it and I like it to be able to interpret and read other people, whether it's a pirate on a ship or their crew, and understanding an avoidant versus someone who's a little bit more outgoing. I'd appreciate that, and in the context of a group and being able to get groups together, because HR decision where you're using something to exclude a person is, that's definitely what I would hope every HR enterprise pursues, is trying to get people to work together as opposed to finding a way to delineate and separate. Because I want a job too.
Totally.
Anyway,
So to the point about the big five being able to be predictive, I do think that it has predictive capabilities. What I was referring to is that if you, you know, like the example of where I said how in my leadership program, they took people on both sides of the room and we all gave very similar answers to the people on our side of the room, but very opposite types of answers from the people on the other side of the room. I don't think you could do that with high intelligence, low intelligence, you know, and, you know, with highly extroverted versus low extroversion, sure you could, but that's the same strata as the MBTI has, which I find fascinating. You know, introversion versus extroversion is the same as high introversion versus low introversion. So they really reused one of the whole categories from the Myers-Briggs in the Big Five, which, you know, is very interesting considering how much they criticize the Myers-Briggs. Why would they, if it's so bad, why would they use one of the categories from it? And so all I'm saying is that if you took all the high intelligence people and low intelligence people and put them on opposite sides of the room and you ask them, what factors would you think of when moving the headquarters of a corporation? I don't think the high intelligence people would all think of the same things, and they would be the opposite types of things as the low intelligence people. You know what I mean?
I agree with you from that perspective. I don't think that there's a correlation there. I think other metrics like intelligence can be measured in your memory length and the amount of facts you can hold in your head at one time, possibly. But as far as that particular test, I doubt that would represent maybe self-awareness more than intelligence.
Yeah, and that's where, like, you know, I don't know, like I'd be surprised if someone couldn't game the intelligence factor. But maybe that's just my guesstimate is that it seems like it should be gameable, but because if you just answer things that will make you seem more intelligent, you know, then why wouldn't you give those answers? Because you know, people are going to want to be perceived as more intelligent. So but anyway, and so Peter, go ahead.
I was thinking about, I don't know if the Myers-Briggs officially talks about this per se, but I wonder where a category like compartmentalization would take place, because especially within the case of work. So I know, for instance, at my work, for instance, if you lose a loved one, you can take time off on, I think it's called bereavement pay or
That's
something
right.
like that. And I think it sort of goes on the assumption that there are certain emotional experiences that, I mean, some people, I guess, are more resilient than others, but generally speaking, if it's something like you lose a spouse or a child or a parent, it's just so intense that you can't compartmentalize it, and you have to sort of take away from work because it's for that reason. But I'm wondering, I mean, there must be a spectrum of, for instance, people who, I mean, setting aside extreme examples, so it's like the person who can, you know, they can have a terrible breakup, for instance, and they can simply put it to the side and do really rigorous, demanding, sort of high concentration needed work, versus somebody who you have something like that and it's just like the walls between the different areas of their life in their head just sort of come crashing down. It's like that they can't. So the person who, I don't know, has a terrible breakup or divorce or whatever else, you know, it's just sort of like they get to work and it consumes them so much that their work suffers. So it's like, I'm surprised there isn't some category. I guess that would fall under, what is it, like thinking and
No, what you're talking about would fall under the assertive, turbulent one, where it was like stress handling, and emotional response. Like assertive people will be more emotionally resilient, is probably the primary one, whereas turbulent people are going to be more impacted by their emotions. And I think it's emotions and stress. Like a lot of people, when you lose a loved one, feel stress from that, because especially if it's someone that you were really close to, So I would say it falls into those categories, but I'm not sure what you were where you were going with the bereavement part about how it relates to the Myers-Briggs. Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, sorry. So just the fact that bereavement pay for, or not pay, but bereavement time off is that it's officially that it's that the workplace is officially in some sense acknowledging. I mean, I think this is why, for instance, maybe it's just certain companies. I know it's my company, for instance, why they would even offer it, officially, formally offer it, is that I think it sort of rests upon the assumption that grief would be such an intense emotion that it could easily stress someone out of being able to properly concentrate on work. And it's just the level of resilience is the demand is much higher. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like,
I hear what you're saying. I don't know how to tie it to the Myers-Briggs. Help me there.
just because workplaces use Myers-Briggs, that's why. So it's sort of the different uses. Actually, I'm not sure how to frame it in terms of Myers-Briggs, but just
It's
that
okay.
yeah, I guess more that it would. I'm trying to figure out where it would fall, where the tendencies, the differences of resiliency would fall within something like Myers-Briggs. I guess that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's the turbulent and the other
Turbulent.
one, turbulent, assertive. The assertive folks are I'm pretty sure I'm assertive. We're more like resilient to those types of things, and then turbulent people are sort of more stressed out more easily and more emotionally vulnerable. Um, yeah, but I think bereavement is something that the workplace acknowledges. Like when you lose a loved one, you should let
Take
people
time
have their
off.
time to heal and to grieve and to to have some humanity, and not it's unfortunately there's no legal requirement for bereavement. It's something that's a company policy, but I think it's a good policy to have. So thanks, Peter, for
And I
your
feel like it's, I mean, it seems like in most workplaces I've gone to, unless it's run by complete psychopaths, usually, if somebody says my mom died, they're not just gonna be, oh, I don't care,
yeah.
get here at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
People are usually going to be pretty understanding about that type of thing. Yeah.
Yes, most human beings will. So, um, Jameson, go ahead.
Yeah, that actually made me think. But first of all, with bereavement, I used to work for an employer that provided bereavement, and I know that it is cultural as much as it is emotional, like for preparations or handling the events around a loss like that. But it made me think about um and its effect. Some people get immediately impacted, and some people it impacts them down the line. And that made me realize that even that test, like depending upon the point in time when you take that test, is going to affect your outlook on some of those. And that turbulent emotional aspect is probably all of the dimensions of that test could be affected in a particular way. And you can't really probably, who knows if you can measure it next to when something happens, versus because different people respond differently. But yeah, that's what that would be the one aspect of that test that I'm sure someone's already thought of, but um that I find interesting as far as trying to relate with people and putting that in perspective.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know, Jamie, if you want to talk about what you were saying about compartmentalization is not the same as grieving types. We don't have any hands up, so if you want to talk about what you were talking about there, I didn't.
Sure, yeah, I can talk about that briefly.
Yeah.
Just, I know it's not directly related to MBTI, but it's just another dimension that is used a lot in counseling and psychology, is the grieving styles. So some people compartmentalize differently, And one way of doing that is the way they grieve is instrumental grieving, which is when you want to work and work with your hands to get back to work and be active in the way you grieve. Where intuitive grievers are far more of the stereotypical emotional, I want to cry and feel it out, and we're versus the ones who feel they want to do something. So those are two different grieving styles, which are not really related to MBTI. That does connect to the comment about compartmentalization, how effective we are in getting back to work. So that's all I wanted to say there. Thanks.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Christine, go ahead.
Hi there. I had a comment to make on the I think it was Paul's comment saying different levels of being affected by a death in the family or something. That actually happened to me. I had someone die in last month, and I was sharing this with a coworker, asked an explanation for why I hadn't gotten something done for her, and she basically sent me that as a response. She said, "Yeah, so get back to work." Right? So as an INFJ, it occurred to me, I'm glad that I know the MBTI, because I did not go immediately to judgment, right? I thought to myself, she's missed the significance of this, of what I shared with her, right? And so I wrote her a comment back and I said, "Geez, Kelly, that's cold." And she got that, right? And I could have said a whole lot more, right? I wanted to say a whole lot more, and I just left it at that. And I said, you know, that's a bit cold. And she wrote back and she said, "What? I missed something. What?" And I told her, I said, "A relative of mine died." And she said, "Oh, I didn't get that." And you know, before I knew my MBTI type, I would not have thought to give her a second chance. And that's what I've learned. When I get offended, somebody, probably an extrovert, has missed something. I wrote this thing. It had everything in it that was needed. It had all the information. And I'm assuming that people are going to read it and think about it. And I have found that with, I won't generalize, but with some people, they think aloud. They don't speak like I do. If I say something, for instance, there was a delay between the time that Paul said that thing and I responded, right? It was like maybe 5 minutes. Okay, so I thought about it. Other people will think aloud. And so they're just going through their thought evaluation process, and they'll put the first thing that comes to their mind is the first thing out. That does not mean it's the best thing out, right? And so I have learned to give people, it is really like I have an owner's manual to people in the event a conflict develops for me. And I wanted to point out one other thing, that we're all talking in this discussion as if our impressions are accurate the first time around. And that may or may not be true, right? We may, something might strike us as really offensive or really nice, the backhanded compliment, and at first we're like, oh, wow, they're so friendly. And then you think about it and they're like, no, they're not. They just insulted me, right? So that's, I think, something also to keep in mind as we have discussions with other people. And there was one other analogy I wanted to make with that, in terms of, if you can't see it, and if you can't see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, it doesn't exist. We're all breathing air, and none of us can speak. The only time we can feel it is if there's a lot of it hitting the side of our face, then we can feel it, right? But oxygen is one of those things, and there's probably a lot of other things that we may not have a taste, we may not be able to identify it, but it still might be there. Just something to keep in mind. Thanks for letting me share.
No, thank you. And I shared at another event that a statistic that I learned that baffled me, which is part of why I advocate so strongly for what I call listening to understand, which is what, like basically the statistic was that 90% of conflict comes from misunderstanding. And because of that, like the reason that we're angry is almost always like what I do now since learning that statistic is when I'm upset about something, I try very hard instead of getting upset about it to say, is what you're saying X, and I say, and X is what I think they were saying. And inevitably they go, no, that's not at all what I meant. And I had a misunderstanding about what they were trying to communicate. I know what I took away from what they said, but very often it's not what they actually meant. And so by reiterating back to someone with reflective listening, I think you just said X, is that a correct assertion? Like, is what you're trying to say that, I have really strong confirmation bias and I just came out here tonight to prove myself right that the Myers-Briggs is useful? Or are you trying to say that, maybe maybe like maybe there's a possibility that some of what you presented is wrong, in which case, sure, maybe there is, right? Like I did my best to present what I think is right, but I might be wrong about anything that I think is right. And if I am, like, I'm happy to have someone present alternative, studies, etc. So, like that's what learning is about, is learning from each other. So, glad to hear that that was a misunderstanding, Christine, because it did sound pretty cold when you said it. So, go ahead, Sam.
Hi, yeah, I think yeah, just to jump on what you said about learning from each other.
Yeah.
I have learned something here, and I put it in the chat, but I thought I'd just bring it to the voice group as well. I claimed that only introverts and extroverts, like only that spectrum was like researched or like empirically validated, and that the other three were made up, which was I used quite strong language, to be fair. I've been corrected by a few people, and fair enough. It looks like two of the others were based on work by Jung. It appears that the two creators did make up the judgment perception axis, but the other two are real things. The other two have had research done on them. So I've learned that. I thought, I didn't know that. Yeah, the other two were like, yeah, real things. But I still, the fact that the fourth one is made up, if I can use that language, I think that's maybe a cause to drop the last letter. Maybe we can make it the only a 3-letter test, perhaps. Otherwise, we're just making stuff up, I think. So that was one thing I posted in the chat, and then the other one there was it's in the weeds. I won't quote it here on the voice. People can read it in the chat. But the study that claims that it's predictive, it's not a meta study. It was just 100 employees at this one company in India. 92% of them were males, etc. So like it's pretty limited in terms of demonstrating predictive power. I think I don't quite. Yeah, I didn't find the paper particularly convincing, I suppose, based on
That's
like
okay.
5 minutes of
If you have papers that you think are convincing in the other direction, send them my way. You can point out demographic flaws in the group that was studied, but there was another one that was a meta study, and that's why I said I didn't remember for sure. My memory is not my strength. But one of the studies that I presented in the presentation is a meta study. I just didn't remember which one it was. So cool.
Yeah, I guess I didn't check all of them. I just checked the one on predictive power, because in my mind that's really the main thing. If the personality types that it gives out don't predict anything, I think that's a deal breaker for me. I can't imagine what else I could be gaining from it. I mean, self-affirmation is, I guess, something, like we shouldn't completely discount the sense of joy that we get from that, but I think that's just the same thing as horoscopes at that point. So we have to be careful about how much we put into it.
You should keep in mind that extroversion, introversion is also part of the big five. So if extroversion, introversion aren't predictable in the Myers-Briggs, they're also not predictable in the big five.
Oh, okay. No, I should clarify that. Yeah. So that one is definitely, there's a lot of research into introversion and extroversion. You're right that it's in the big five, and like I was saying, two of the other axes apparently do have some research put into them. I think it's just having this grid of 16 squares and being like, I'm INTJ or whatever. That's where it's like, I'm Aries, and like, so like that part of it where
Right, but
that hasn't.
remember I said that's not what it's about. It's not about your type per se. It's about where you are in the spectrum. But you have to simplify things for people to understand and to categorize, because that's what we do as human beings. And that's why there are types, is to categorize. You're more of one than the other, but if you're in the middle, you're really not more of one than the other. You're kind of in the middle. And so I think, though, if you look at like the examples that I gave between people who are spontaneous versus planners, do you think that there's no real distinction between people who are planners versus people who are spontaneous? Do you see those as like, like one person could be a planner on vacations, one vacation, and then the next vacation they just suddenly switch to be completely spontaneous, and that's pretty much your experience in life?
No, I think you're right. I think that there is, like, that is a quality that a lot of people have, and there is a spectrum there. I think that's fair. It's that, so maybe where we can like meet in the middle, like compromise and have some agreement, is it sounds like we're both like some of the axes, some of the spectrums in isolation, and perhaps and we can maybe drop the 4x4 grid, forget that part of it, like the self-identifying with one of the squares,
Yeah,
and just focus on the individual spectrums.
you're right. I think it's better to focus on the individual things, like, because if you're in the middle, like whether you're one letter or not is irrelevant, and you're kind of both. And so if anything, what I would do, if you're like me, like an ambivert, you should read the I and the E and recognize that maybe both will resonate with you. Most likely both will resonate with you. And if you want to read an overarching generalization of the overall type, but I agree with you. I think learning where you are in the spectrum on each one, and recognizing that other people are on one end, somewhere along that spectrum, and you don't ever know where until you figure out how they work, and that there's value in figuring out how they work. That's all I would say. And I think you were saying the same thing, if I'm not wrong, and in which case we're in agreement.
Yeah, like with some qualifiers, but yeah.
Yeah, with some qualifiers is fair. We should always have qualifiers, but I usually try to make things as simple as possible, just because time is short. Shoot, Jeff put his hand down. I wanted to hear. Oh, there it is. Okay. So let's let Jeff go, if you don't mind, Will, because you've spoken a couple of times and Jeff hasn't yet tonight. So Jeff, I would love to hear what you have to say, and then we'll go to Will afterward. You're on mute, Jeff.
You might have thought he had a few minutes up his sleeve.
You might have. All right, so go ahead, Will.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, well, I was just thinking about psychology, and as I was I had another question, but as I was thinking about just watching the lead up to the Australian Open tennis, starts next week, and we've got some warm-up games, and there's a big audience watching the television around the country at the moment, because we love sports so much. And one of the commercials that just came on, one of the advertisements, was some people buying a house, and they stand in front of this house that they bought, and they signed the contract. And at that moment, they've just signed on the dotted line, and a big jet, it flies over the house at low altitude. And they're selling. And I thought, what an excellent ad. It was really I don't like advertising, but I thought that's a good one. And they're selling an app that you can measure noise levels wherever you are. And I thought, how clever. Anyway, that got me thinking about psychology and how most people, I heard a professor of psychology speaking a while ago, and he was saying that most people studying psychology are doing it for marketing and advertising because it's all about psychology. And then I thought of what Karl Marx said, Das Kapital, the genius, when he wrote that every human emotion will be commodified somehow in the future. And he was a genius, that guy. Love him or hate, his ideology. He was a genius. And he said that, everything we do, someone's going to figure out how to make a buck out of every emotion you can possibly feel. Someone will try to make a buck out of it. So I was just I'm just waxing lyrical with those thoughts, but I thought how that possibly applies to Myers-Briggs as well. Like there is that item to get you, there is that element to get you sucked into it and then dish out your credit card details as well. So just without being too cynical, cynicism is not a bad thing. It's got a negative reputation, but the original Greek cynics were all about looking at things objectively, not negatively, as it's now defined as. So cynically, I would say to just be careful of pop psychology. And that leads me to my main question, which was, is there like an industry standard for professional psychiatrists or psychologists that they use? Does anyone know to ascertain personality types for clinical diagnosis? So I just wondered if there is something contrary to this sort of pop psychology stuff. Thanks.
Well, I mean, psychologists. Go ahead.
Just to clarify the question, are you asking about like using this sort of personality thing in businesses, like inside of corporations, or you just mean like
if there's like if somebody's being diagnosed by a professional health provider, if there's a test that they go to?
I think the big five.
As like a Myers-Briggs type?
Yeah, that sort of thing, but yeah, if there's an alternative, there must be an alternative, I'd say.
There is like, so there's like free Myers-Briggs tests that you can take, but there's also paid Myers-Briggs tests that you can take that are, like proctored by like a professional. And like we did that back when I was at GE. Like we took a paid Myers-Briggs test. It wasn't like a free one. And it was part of the whole training. If I'm not remembering wrong, I'm pretty sure we took a paid Myers-Briggs test, and they have they have ones for that. So yeah, there are paid options too.
Well, as far as clinical diagnosis goes, I think the answer Will might be looking for is the big five. Which uses the acronym OCEAN, like OCEAN.
All right. You probably already talked about that. Sorry, I've been a bit distracted.
That was what Carl presented on a number of weeks ago, is on the Big Five, which is the Big Five is the test that PhDs in psychology generally push because it was invented, in my opinion, and from the opinion of the PhD who told me it was because it was invented by PhDs in psychology is why they push that and ignore the Myers-Briggs. But that's still subject of debate, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. Disagree on that. It's been shown to be predictive.
Well, and they have both been shown to be predictive by different studies. And like again, like if you use the Myers-Briggs, you will see the predictiveness in your own experience, like without any question. Like again, like if you look at whether or not someone is a planner or spontaneous in their personal life, and you look at how they handle their vacations, I guarantee you, whether or not they're a strong P or a strong J, it'll be clear like how they plan their vacations. Like it's very predictive in that regard. And if PhDs were actually holding studies that showed or didn't show that, it would be very clear. But PhDs aren't going to or they're not going to hold studies that show predictiveness for something that they're trying to disprove, right? So, the question is whether or not confirmation bias is common in the industry. and making people kind of have an end in mind before they actually run the studies. Again, like, you know, for people, and I know many people that have used Myers-Briggs on a regular basis throughout their careers that can vouch that it's been very predictive in their experience, and they don't have any stake in the game other than it's useful or it's not useful, right? So there's no bias for someone who is just trying it out and seeing whether or not it's useful. But that said, let's let Rose go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for example, in forensic psychology, they don't really use this test, and they use other tests, as you mentioned, like I don't know, maybe the court doesn't accept it, or the psychology, not, you know, in psychology, it's not as accepted as it should be. For example, if you look at the test that they did in Johnny Depp forensic with his ex-wife, they don't really do those tests as far as forensic tests. It's another thing.
So you're
that's
saying
kind of what I meant, like, yeah, in a forensic, yeah, thanks for that. In
so
the
you're saying,
forensics-
Rose, in like in a court of law, would it be used?
No, this one is not going to be used. The other tests, you know, they rely more on the other tests rather than this particular test. I know that, like, in corporation, they use this test widely, or personally people use it, but not in forensic, not in law practice. So this test is more popular in general than psychology and forensic.
Yeah, I don't know why courts would be using personality tests in the first place, but I'm gonna try to look that up. But let's let go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah,
I think Sam might have had his hand up before. Sam, did you want to say something?
All good.
Okay, go ahead, Will.
I thought he had his hand up from before, sorry. I was just thinking of, like, when somebody goes to court and they're trying to make the defense of not guilty by reasons of insanity. Now I'm suddenly intrigued by that, and that the insanity would be classed as a biological cause, and this is the difference between psychiatry and psychology. And I think of, so psychiatry is dealing with the hardware, like the computer chip itself. If there's a fault in it and you are born with that, it's beyond your control. And this alludes to free will as well, that the psychology is more like the software. I don't know if we have any psychologists here, but so the software is programmable. And then you get the concept of free will from the psychology, because you can sort of you have the freedom to write your own software. However, if you're born with a neurological deficiency, you have no choice in that. And that's why the court will differentiate between psychiatric condition or a psychological condition, but the psychological environmental upbringing of a defendant will also be taken into account if they've been abused. For instance, if they've suffered abuse or trauma, this can reprogram the mind, and they can say, well, this person had no control over their actions. And the other one is crimes of passion. So if you come home and your wife's in bed with the pool cleaner and you hit him over the head with a brick, you will get less, and sorry if that's too graphic a joke, I've got to be careful what I say, but you know, if you overreact in crimes of passion, you will be given leniency by the court. So I just find that really intriguing, the free will aspect and biological determinism. But I just guess there is some real industry standard where they can determine it's psychological, or, you know, and I don't think they'd be using the Myers-Briggs test if your life depended on it in a court of law. But Your Honour, I'm an IFPGA. I had no choice but to steal the bottle of milk. Anyway, it's fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it does seem like that's the case, is like looking at emotional competency, mental harm done, you know, things like that. And the big five is definitely more considered, you know, for use in courts because of its backing by psychologists. Christine, go ahead.
Hi, I had a question for Will. What you just said about psychology and psychiatry and being in court and being determined to be criminally, psychologically liable for crime. So my understanding is that culture can have an enormous effect on whether someone's psychology or psychological actions or thinking are normal or pathological. And so I'm not quite sure I understood you correctly. What you said was a big loaded thing. And I'm wondering whether you might entertain that, the role of culture in determining whether someone's actions are, quote, normal or not.
Well, it's a classic example of environmental influence, and it would be deemed as per the court, the culture of the court that you are presenting in front of. So, you know, if you commit a crime in, say, Saudi Arabia, and you're in front of a Saudi Arabian magistrate or court, of course they're going to apply their culture to your crime, and if you could perhaps make the plea, I don't think it works very well, that you were raised in a different culture, would they take that into consideration? But certainly, and I don't think that works anyway, but they certainly take into account cultural considerations. And if you were raised in that culture and you break that culture's law, there's no excuse unless you can prosecute the case that it was something wrong with the hardware and not guilty by reasons of insanity, for instance. So yeah, I'd say that the culture is just classic 101 example of environmental factors.
So you're saying that it's actually the component of it's being debatable rather than saying that you can determine someone to be insane or not, without regard to culture.
I think you can certainly be deemed insane, I would say, via environmental factors. So if you were traumatized or post-traumatic stress, for instance, which I know a bit about, you can certainly have a aberration in your functioning and reasoning as a result of that environmental cause, as opposed to just being born with a disorder, you know, like a psychopathy. You're born psychopathy or narcissistic personality disorder, for instance. People are born that way quite often.
I don't know that you can say that, because they say that psychopathy cannot be diagnosed until someone is way past their teenage years.
But that doesn't mean that they're not born with it, though.
Well, how are you going to go back and find out? How can you prove it?
Well, I think they'd go on the evidence of if somebody has had has had a reasonable upbringing and had a lot of love shown to them in their childhood, and they're still committing psychopathic actions later in life. There's enough evidence to suggest. I mean, it's quite a hard science, and there's a lot, reams of information that would suggest that this person has an aberration in their neural network or whatever hormonal system that causes them to have no empathy, for instance. So
I'm not quite sure that one can go about that, because the brain in a developing human.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're getting off the topic of Myers-Briggs and into other things. So I'd like to let Jeff go because he was trying to speak earlier and we're almost done with the event. So I want to give Jeff a chance to speak up if that's okay.
Okay, yep, sorry.
Well, I'm glad in a way that I didn't speak when I did. I have to confess, Garrett, I was trying to think of something to say that would appear smart, but the
You always manage that, Jeff. So go ahead.
first of all, I want to affirm, Will, the part of what you're saying that all of these things are are phenomenally culturally influenced, and even in the conversation that you all were, you and Christine were getting into, all of these categories and all of, for good Lord, all of these diagnoses and all that, they're just constructs. They're just human constructs. They're theories, and they're somewhat useful, and if we depend on them too much, they're not. And I wanted to say to Sam, Sam, I really appreciate your orientation to saying, okay, well, do these things stand up when put through rigorous study and evaluation? And I think that's really important. But I want to offer you something that is just a complete other side to it, okay? Because I've had experience with this particular orientation for about 3 decades. And I've looked at it, and I think all the basic elements of how it got created and even how it got expanded, I found all kinds of reasons to say, well, shoot, I guess I have to throw that away, and like literally. And on the other hand, I have found this particular construct within my own absolute, white guy, American, educated, perspective and experience and culture and socialization and orientation. I personally, and with other folks that I've been, part of with in many different organizations and situations, I found this one especially useful, despite all the reasons that I could give why, oh, come on, and the funny thing is, the one that you were noting there, that in a way is maybe kind of made up, the judging versus perceiving. I can tell you that personally, the judging one of kind of thinking in an organized way, putting a grid, for example, onto a way of thinking, and especially having a predisposition towards closure and finishing things, which is all part of this judging category. The words are a little bit unfortunate in the way that they are oriented. I think judging is not really a good word for this. Closure is an especially good word for it, as opposed to those of us like me who have trouble finishing things, but we are terrific at starting things and at seeing things in the whole, not necessarily seeing all the parts, but really envisioning. And I'm phenomenally good at that. And I won't tell you the stories, but I have to tell you, I'm phenomenally good at that. But people would say to me over time, over the years, we'd go into a meeting and something that we were trying to plan, Garrett, to your point, and we'd meet, say, every other week in order to make progress in how we were organizing extraordinarily complex things. And they would say to me, now, Jeff, this time, could we just acknowledge that we have talked about this before? And we've made certain decisions here about the direction that we're going. And yeah, there's a lot that's happened, and, there's a lot that's on the horizon. And yeah, you might have thought of all kinds of things, ways to shift this. But could we at least pretend that we have talked about this before?
Jeff, that sounds like you and me, and if we were in meetings together, I would be the guy saying those things.
Yeah. And the way that this became incredibly useful for me was, first of all, people just felt, in a way, better understood. Even if this was only 2/3 accurate, And I can tell you on the thinking and feeling is a horrible word for this. It's not what they
It
mean.
is.
They really mean logic and values. Okay. I generally score high on the values side. And I have the ability and sometimes the predisposition to come at something with ruthless logic. And every single time I do it, it surprises the hell out of the people around me because they don't know that that's also going on. While the base of my passions is really in the values, they all of a sudden they feel, in their words, feedback to me, interrogated by the logic that that I'm going to all of a sudden make them satisfy here, when we were being creative and passionate and imaginative and all that before. So all these things are true in terms of the to some degree, the variability in it. Maybe it's only 70% true. The usefulness of it in terms of people being able to feel understood. The downside of it in terms of people feeling kind of pigeonholed into something that is not really totally them. And yet the ability to say, okay, if we need to think something up from scratch, let's call Jeff. Okay, if we need to actually organize something because we'd like to finish it and actually get something done, let's call Garrett. Just in a final thing, I led an organization for 3 decades, and in the second decade, my board of directors said, "You absolutely must hire a COO." And I said, "Oh, why would that?" Because we need some things to get done around here that you've been telling us you're going to do for a decade, and they really do need to get done, and they did. And she was fantastic. And it enabled us to get things done that I would have never done. And it had to do with predisposition. So, it is culture, and these are constructs, and some of them, will hold up under rigorous research and evaluation. And some of them, personally, I've just found to be enormously helpful, and I don't even know why. And that's my story.
Thanks, Jeff. And maybe someday I'll have enough spare money to do some research with some open-minded PhDs that would be reproducible by some skeptics that I think would show that the Myers-Briggs personality types actually do hold up to predictability and consistency when approached the right way. But we'll save that for another couple of years. So that said, I want to thank you for your comments, Jeff. I wholeheartedly agree, and I want to let Jameson go, and then we'll close out.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I was just gonna share with you that any additional indicator, like that particular test, I find personally useful. I mean, just personally, and in addition, I guess a lot of people probably should be aware of like the data science that's available that you can run up against a lot of those metrics to, and test empirically people's behavior against what they self-report on those self-reporting metrics, and all of that kind of contributes to a better understanding of how we behave. So I think that regardless of that metric kind of wells up to the points and illustrates the type of people that we are and what we do, whether we're antisocial or not narcissistic, I think that definitely that's a good start. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. I put the link to next week's meetup. We're going to be talking about, is it good or bad to offshore jobs? I think it'll be a fascinating debate. We cover a lot of politically divisive topics here in polite ways, and so that one I expect will be politically divisive. I'll try to come up with what I think is a logical perspective and back it with data, and also logic. So hope that people can make it next week, or to the next event that's of interest to you. We have a lot scheduled on the calendar for the next couple of months. I think we have most of the next couple of months scheduled out, and I'm going to try to keep it so that we have a good lead time, and we're not doing things last minute like we were for a little while there. But thanks all for your great conversation points and comments and questions, and for listening to each other with an open mind, and thanks for for people acknowledging that they learned in this from each other, from me, from everyone, and appreciate that. That's what this is all about. I'd argue our purpose on this earth is to learn knowledge and wisdom, and we had another event on that where I tried to make that argument. And I'd argue whether it's our purpose on this earth or not, it's always going to benefit us, so you might as well do it. And that said, thanks again, everybody, for coming, and hope to see you all again at another meeting soon. Take care. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
It was fun.